This is Victoria Cartagena. I play Renee Montoya on Gotham, and you're listening to Gotham TV Podcast.
Hey, this is Andrew Stewart-Jones. I play Christopher Allen on Gotham, and you are listening to Gotham TV Podcast.
Hi, and welcome to Gotham TV Podcast, the unofficial podcast of the TV show Gotham. I'm Derek, one of your hosts.
Hi, and I'm John, your other host.
And in this episode, we talk about episode 3 of Gotham, Baloonman. How are you this week, John?
I'm doing pretty well, thanks, yeah.
Excellent.
Recovered from the travels and excitement and music-like festivalness of New York Comic Con, which is great.
And I see the nerd cold is gone.
Yes.
Excellent.
Breathing easy and feeling good, so, yeah.
Good stuff. Well, I guess we'll start off with the news for this week, as usual.
Yeah, so in Gotham news then this week, Marina Baccarin, who many will remember as Inara from Joss Whedon's Firefly and Serenity. She also played Anna in the updated version of V from the 80s Alien Fest and Attack into of Planet Earth, the infamous hamster scene, was it? Or gerbil scene?
Well, yeah. The updated version was a little bit more measured, really, throughout its 2 seasons.
And then also, most recently, in her Emmy Award-winning role as Nicholas Brody's wife, Jessica, on Homeland. And she has joined Gotham. And she is going to be playing a character called Dr. Leslie Tompkins on the show, and potentially is a love interest for Jim Gordon.
Potentially, yeah. But really excited to see Marina Baccarin join the show. I'm a huge fan of Serenity and huge fan of Joss Whedon stuff like Firefly. So I've known her right back since then, and all the way through V. Watched every episode of that, and then Homeland also was a fantastic show, at least for the first 3 seasons, and loved her performance on that. So I'm really looking forward to seeing what she does in the show. She's a lot younger than the character of Leslie Tompkins that we would know from the comic books. She's Leslie Tompkins is kind of a helper of Batman, and in the comic books a much older character. But it would make sense, if there's another 18 years to go before Batman arrives, or even 15 years to go before Batman arrives, then Marina Baccarin's going to be quite.
She's going to be younger.
Older.
Yeah. It's fitting into that timeline that, to be honest, has got to be one of the big considerations for any casting or introduction of characters is, do you play them as everyone already knows them, or do you play them a younger version, look at their backstory, look at their origins, because of the whole show's premise, which is Gotham before the Batman, and having young Bruce Wayne. And
to be honest with you, regardless of what she looks like in the comic books, getting an actress like Marina Baccarin on the show is exciting enough as it is, so I don't really mind that they've changed the character slightly just from that point of view.
Absolutely. I mean, I'm pretty excited by Marina Baccarin coming in, to be honest, because it's another great actress from TV, and I, again, like yourself, I really like her. I've liked the stuff she's done previously. It's sci-fi stuff, or it's political drama. So I'm really up on that, and I've loved her in those shows that I mentioned there just before.
Yeah, excellent. And a bit of DC Connected Universe news. This is the big week in the UK for DC Connected shows. We got Flash premiering on the 28th of October on Sky One, and we've also got Arrow returning this week on the 30th of October
on Sky One well.
On Sky One as well. Yeah. So there's the 2 premieres of the I suppose the big CW shows from the States, are both being shown on the same channel over here.
Exactly. And then last Friday, 24th of October, Constantine premiered on NBC in the USA, and then we'll be every Friday following on there, just before Grimm,
and just after it, maybe.
Or just after Grimm, I should say. Yeah. And Constantine will then also exclusively be available on Amazon Prime Instant Video in the UK. This service isn't really available to people outside of the UK. So for ourselves here in Ireland, we're unable to avail of it, even though we would generally go through amazon.co.uk to purchase stuff on Amazon. But this particular service on Amazon, presumably because of rights and all that, is only available for those in the UK. And so we really have to just wait for any announcement about who might pick up this show for Ireland.
Yeah, as we mentioned last week, we're not actually going to be covering Constantine because we know it's not available on release outside of the UK. We do know now that it's available in the UK. So if you're lucky enough to get it, definitely watch it. We've seen the pilot in the US, and it is really, really good, well worth watching, as we mentioned last week. And at the moment, we're putting up some interviews with the cast that we did at New York Comic Con. We're putting them up on our website. So go to the usual address, GothamTVPodcast.com, and have a check out in those interviews.
Yeah, we were lucky enough that as part of the roundtables for the Gotham cast and creators, that it was we were asked whether we would like to also be involved with the roundtable interviews for the cast and creator that attended NYCC for Constantine. So that's obviously Matt Ryan, Angelica Salea, and then David F. Scoia.
Mm-hmm. Yep. So good, some good interviews. Just finishing off the finishing touches on them. But Matt Ryan's gone up already, and we should have Angelica and David up pretty soon. So check out those interviews. Really good, and the show itself, as I said, really, really good. We'd be expecting that because the Amazon Prime Instant rights in the UK are exclusive for them, that no other channel in the UK will be getting it until Amazon have finished broadcasting it. So that will be probably early next year, but there is a potential that an Irish station could be broadcasting it for us. So we may get coverage of it sometime in 2015.
Absolutely, and it's also just to point out that the episodes go up on Amazon Prime literally the day after they've aired in the US as well.
That's right. Lucky things. Might have to move back to the UK, John.
Have to take a shit back and forth.
Yeah.
Of course, I mean a boat, not a ship.
And with that, that's pretty much it for the news. I think we're on to the review of Baloonman. Alright, so do you want to give us a rundown of Baloonman?
Yeah, so episode 3 of Gotham is entitled Baloonman. And in this episode, an unknown, disillusioned Gothamite turns vigilante, picking off and killing high-profile, corrupt public figures. Both Jim Gordon and Harvey Bullock are asked to investigate the Baloonman case, as it's known, because his signature kill is to cuff the victims to weather balloons, sending them high up into the stratosphere to a frozen and pretty gruesome death. In the meantime, Oswald Cobblepot has now returned back to Gotham and sees his opportunity to reassert himself in Gotham through the Maroney's family empire, as they are in competition with the Falcone family. All the while, Jim Gordon's lies surrounding Oswald and Oswald's death is beginning to tighten around him as the MCU, as well as other people much closer to him, start to ask uncomfortable questions.
Yeah. So quite a bit in this episode, really. Kind of overall, myself, impressions of it. It's all right. Not the best of the 3 episodes so far, but I'll go into kind of my reasoning behind that, and as we discuss through the episode itself. Interesting to see a vigilante in Gotham this early.
Yeah, I mean, my initial thoughts, I think, really, and I suppose we will ultimately go into them a bit more in detail, is that this seemed to be kind of trying to go for a much lighter approach to the case that was involved. Obviously people being strapped to a balloon has a comic or comedic element, to it. It's a bit lighter, and certainly there was a much sort of lighter or comedic element between some of the scenes with Jim and Harvey Bullock in them.
Yeah.
And to me, it seemed to be a lighter episode. I'm not going to say it's evoking Batman 66 or something like that. Not to that level, but it was trying to maybe say that this universe can have funny elements, funny moments, be comedic. It's not just simply all the dark tones and the seriousness. Having said that, there were quite dark and serious elements to this episode. And I think my main issue was that whether they fully worked together, I don't know. Whether it came off, whether they were able to pull that off, I don't know. For me, I still think there's some really good points from the serialized elements of the storyline here.
Yeah, no, I agree. We introduced one of the great points from the serialized part with the opening of the episode with Oswald as he arrives back in town, which is a really good scene to begin the episode. It's a good establishing shot of Gotham and basically the criminality that's all around everywhere you go. He steps off the bus and around him you've got kids pickpocketing the guy. You've got cop extorting money, obviously, from someone on the street.
Exactly.
You've got a handbag being snatched, and then you've got prostitutes all around them in the middle of the day in Gotham. You know, a typical homecoming for Oswald Cobblepot.
And he's just this smile as he's looking around. It's almost like a child in a sweet shop or a candy store kind of going, "Oh, this is exactly where I want to be. Yeah. This is where I'm supposed to be." And this smile that he's sort of returning home.
Yeah, it's kind of like if you've missed the first 2 episodes, this is what we discovered about Gotham. It's riddled with crime. So I like that. I thought that was a good little opening scene.
And then there's a kind of little, I suppose, narrative trope that's used throughout this episode where on top of, I think it's a bin on the street by one of the street food sellers, there's a TV. It's plugged in wherever it might be.
Somehow. Maybe it's battery powered.
And, you know, it's got breaking news, and this is very evocative of Gotham Central, this notion of using the news to bring the audience very quickly up to speed on the narrative, and it immediately tells of this public figure, a financier, a banker, Ronald Danzier, who has been ripping off old people and bus drivers, you know, and other people within the city of their money.
Yeah, but he's essentially creating pension schemes that he's ripping the money out of. And he becomes the first victim of the Balloonman. A guy in a pig mask walks up to him in the street and offers to give him a balloon, which must have looked pretty weird to the guy. But then he gets handcuffed to a weather balloon that takes him off into the air.
Yeah. So we're introduced to the Balloonman and his way of dealing with these corrupt public officials.
Absolutely. And for me, this scene is awful. I really, really didn't like it. It's obviously doing something like this where you've got a guy flying up, 60, 70 stories to clear buildings. It's clearly not going to be done in real time. It's clearly going to be done by CGI, but it was so noticeable that this was something that was done on a blue screen, and this guy's being lifted off, a couple of feet off the ground and superimposed above buildings. Like, he's completely out of proportion to the buildings when he's above them. It just took me out of it completely. And I think that it was probably the idea that most people are going to be laughing through the scene. Maybe that's what they were thinking. So they're not going to spend as much time as they possibly should have on it. I wasn't personally very happy with the scene.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose I just thought, well, in a universe that can be heightened, like Gotham, that this could be a way of dealing with corrupt public figures, a way of killing people. I mean, it would never happen in reality, but this, to an extent, is a heightened version of reality. So that
certainly is heightened. It's
well, exactly
700 feet in the sky.
I mean, for me, I kind of was glad it was a weather balloon, even though it's probably not physically possible for a weather balloon to take a person up into the stratosphere.
Yeah, I had to check it out just after the episode. I did check it out. A weather balloon apparently would never, ever be able to carry someone of this kind of weight. Of just an average person's weight is about 200 pounds. You'd need 28 weather balloons to lift up a person. Well, I had to check it out.
But then my point really would be that I was glad it was a weather balloon, because that does seem more realistic than maybe 50-odd helium-filled balloons taking someone up. And that's what I thought it might be. So I was kind of quite pleased that it was a weather balloon. I think for me, I just got a lot of flashbacks to my Professor Pig fetish, because the guy was in a pig mask, and I was suddenly thinking, well, Professor Pig's not supposed to be a vigilante, but there's a lot of pig references going on, I think, in the first 3 episodes.
Yeah.
And this was another one with a pig mask, and I'm not entirely sure why. Maybe we need to have Professor Pig watch rather than Joker watch.
Absolutely. I definitely think that the creators of the show are just messing with you at this stage, because when they released this image, I think this image from the Balloonman was released sometime in about July or June of this year, and I think from then on, everybody's been speculating Professor Pig's in the show, and it turns out it's just a guy who's using a mask to cover his face, and it seems to be relatively random. I would kind of have also been one of the things that came into my head when I heard the name of the show Balloonman, and I heard it was going to be about a vigilante. I was hoping it was going to involve the full-on zeppelins that are in the sky over the city. I thought it might involve those. They'd definitely be able to drag a human body with them. You know?
Yeah, and essentially suspend them up out of reach, out of sight, and where they essentially slowly starve to death, freeze, suffer from exposure. And I agree. I think the use of the sort of zeppelins floating above Gotham, as we've gotten in the promotional material, would have been a really good way of doing it. One of these elements, though, that I suppose we need to ask ourselves as well, is that this is part of what I said before about, it's kind of a lighter-hearted or lighter touch to it, and a lighter approach to Gotham and the world of Batman. And I suppose there's always been that argument of whether, it has gone down a very serious narrative-driven route, and maybe this was to try and bring a lighter element, or at least to investigate the appeal of that within a 22-episode show. So I didn't mind it so much. For me, it was whether they introduced a vigilante too soon as well.
Absolutely.
Whether it was all a bit too quick to introduce the concept of vigilante and of vigilantes. I think it could have been done in season 1. Whether episode 3 was the right kind of timing, I don't know. Or whether it could have been drawn out more over the season, this particular vigilante, who knows?
Yep. Yeah, like we're only 3 episodes into the show. I don't want to be hugely critical about this. There are some great elements of the show itself, but I just think this opening scene just before the credits is definitely the weakest of the 3 so far for me. I just felt, regardless of the actual overarching idea of the episode and what they were trying to do with it, I just felt the actual scene itself was just poorly done. But it moves into the investigation of the case again with Jim and Harvey, and this has essentially been the trope for the last 2 weeks of episodes, where a murder happens at the beginning and then it goes on to the investigation of the case itself with Jim and Harvey. Yeah,
and it's this whole notion then that Ronald Danzier, the guy floating up into outer space, essentially deserves it, and very much get that sense from Harvey Bullock that this guy, he ripped off people in the city. He is undeserving of anyone's kind of forgiveness or sympathy in what's just happened to him, which is pretty brutal. And in the same way as with Mario Pepper from the first episode, it's all coming back to this notion that there are people that deserve some of these things, and whether the police should even be attempting to try and resolve and investigate these is another aspect entirely. But what we then come to is this great little line where they've started on this new case for Balloonman. Jim has requested that Selena Kyle be brought to him to essentially reopen the Thomas and Martha Wayne case, and Harvey Bullock is there. What about closed cases? Don't you understand? That we're trying to get these knocked off one by one. Why you keep on and insist on going back to them? And I love this this element of tension that comes in between the two characters for this week that adds that other layer.
Yeah, it's something we mentioned last week, that it's very much Jim wants to solve cases. Harvey wants to close them so that he can go home at the end of the day, essentially. He's just looking for, someone that he can pin it on rather than the actual person. He doesn't really care if it's the right person or not. I partially agree with him about Ronald Danzier coming from a country like ours, where many people lost their homes and lost their life savings because of this guy, because of people like this guy, and his specific comment where he doesn't care. He just wants to get it over with, pay off everybody that's involved, anybody on the jury, the judge, pay them all off so he can get off with the case. That's a total criminal to me.
Well, it's that interesting notion about the victims of Balloonman and who they are and what they represent, which I suppose as we go through them over the course of the podcast, you'll see that, for example, this one is a financier.
Yeah.
So if you think back to the last sort of 5, 6, 7 years and what's happened in various countries around the world to do with banking and stockbroking and hedge funds and so on, then this is someone that's being put up there as beyond the law, and that's why the vigilante is taking action.
Absolutely. And another great thing about this scene is that we get the reintroduction of Selena. There's a reason she's back, which is she's told Jim that she knows who the killer is. Luckily, this is all happening on screen, so we didn't get an off-screen reveal of who the killer is. She's going to tell Jim why she knows and where she was at the time. This is what I was waiting for, that the closeout of episode 2 with that revelation that she's seen the killer. As I mentioned last week, I'm quite dubious about this, that she does know who the killer is. And once again, she makes, she talks much more about why she was there and placing herself in the location, and then runs away and gets away from Jim by breaking out of handcuffs with the stolen pen that she robs from Harvey Bullock when she's in the GCPD, which I thought was quite funny.
That's a nice little sort of, again, fun moment where Harvey Bullock just turns around and like, where's my pen?
Yeah, exactly.
Just before that, he's been saying, stand back to Selena Kyle, you're invading my personal space.
Exactly.
So it's a nice little idea.
She is a little kleptomaniac, but as I say, once again, I don't know what your feeling is, John, about this, but I just feel that Selena's telling the story to Jim that she knows who killed the Waynes, because once again, as she said the last episode, if I had a piece of information that you really wanted, what would you do for me? That's her justification for kind of leading Jim on a bit, so that she can get away from child services and run and go back to her old life, essentially.
I kind of agree with you. I think when we think of Catwoman, and in this sense, then Cat, and she's trying to find her feet with regards to who she is growing up, and ultimately what she becomes, and we obviously know her as to what she becomes.
I heard cats always find their feet, though.
They do. They always land on their four
Sorry,
paws.
I couldn't resist.
She does look out for herself. It's number one. But at the same time, she's not an out-and-out person who won't necessarily think beyond herself and for other people. And I just wonder whether, yes, in this case, she doesn't want to go upstate, as from the previous episode. She doesn't want to go into an orphanage, into an institution, because actually, from the last episode, she's got a locket with a picture of, presumably, and we're assuming her mum, but it's a lady.
It's pretty like it to me.
It's her mum.
Yeah.
And to investigate whether her mum is still alive. She thinks that she is, I would say.
Yeah.
And maybe when we talk about the connection later on between Batman and Catwoman, where does that come from? Other than the fact that they are, masked vigilantes to an extent on different sides of the line, but still walking kind of a middle line. Catwoman is not intrinsically like a Joker. She's not ultimately 100% evil, in the same way that Batman does have an anti-hero element as well in some cases. So, and for me, I wonder whether that connection is ultimately going to be on the fact that they're both orphans, that Selena Kyle gets to see that maybe her mum isn't alive and she is alone in this world, and that is maybe the hub or the genesis of this connection between these two characters. I remember probably back to our second or third podcast where, for me, it was about seeing how these characters come together and develop, and whether, in this case, you have a young Bruce Wayne and a young Selena Kyle, that they are have a connection that goes much further back and means that their connection as Catwoman and as Catwoman and the Batman maybe comes from something even more sort of close to the two of them, and not simply that Batman sees an intrinsic good side to Selena Kyle.
Yeah, absolutely. And she essentially escapes from the handcuffs that Jim has put on her, and she disappears. We don't see her again for the rest of the episode. So that little cliffhanger that we got in episode 2, there's a slight help to it for Jim, but we've always known she was at the location of the murder. And now he knows that, or at least he thinks he knows, that she's the one that saw the murder, you know. This is a murder that will be solved. We've mentioned it before. It's not like nobody ever knew who killed the parents of Bruce Wayne. It will be solved. We know there is a murder. It's just all the dealings behind it that we may not have known in the past before, who put the person up to murder the Waynes. So I would suspect that at some point, if it is Selena Kyle that knows the killer, that she'll come back and there will be that revelation will be made, probably about episode 8 or 9 kind of thing. But she's gone now. She's left the episode.
Yeah, she's escaped. She's escaped juvenile detention and the city children's services because Jim Gordon's asked her to come and help her and question her in the alley. And now she's escaped from Jim Gordon by unpicking the cuffs whilst Jim Gordon is down in a sewer.
Yeah.
And
there is one reference that's in that scene as well, which I completely forgot to mention. Just the reference that she says she can see in the dark. So once again, she's identifying herself as a cat that she can see in the dark. And she's just making that little reference in case you don't know by the fact that she calls herself Cat and does all these movements like a cat.
But she escapes into the city, essentially free now, and maybe that's her purpose. And she no longer then appears in the rest of this episode.
Yeah.
But then I suppose one of the other elements then that we kind of thought we would talk about all together, because they are all kind of linked, relate to those parts of this episode which link to Montoya and Alan, and then with Fish, Jim, and Barbara. They're all kind of slightly connected in a way whereby you have the scenes between Fish and then the MCU, Renee Montoya and Crispus Allen. That then goes and moves to the precinct between these two detectives and Jim Gordon. And ultimately this plays out then between Renee Montoya and Barbara Keene, some of the consequences of these other scenes between those two in Barbara's apartment, and also then begins Barbara down a line of asking Jim to be more open with her.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, there were two big murders in the pilot, and let's not forget that. There were two quite sizable murders. One was of the Wayne parents, and the second one was ostensibly for everybody else in the city. It was the death of Oswald Cobblepot. This was the biggest snitch that Montoya and Allen had. He was the person that was giving them all the information about the underworld, apparently. He gave them the big lead that essentially that the Waynes weren't killed by the person that had been that the crime had been pinned on. So they're essentially just continuing their investigation into where Oswald disappeared to. So they make the assumption that firstly it's probably Fish that killed him off. So they go and interview Fish Mooney about it. Yeah,
and these are really, I think, potentially crucial and important scenes, probably for some of the future episodes. And it certainly is one of this elements about the lie that Jim Gordon has essentially given to Harvey Bullock and ultimately to Carmine Falcone that he has killed Oswald. That suspicion is beginning to tighten in on him as Montoya and Allen go to Fish Mooney's club to investigate Oswald, as you say.
Yeah, like, straight off, I really like this scene. I think this scene is probably one of the standouts of the episode as it goes along. Great little interplay between Montoya and Allen and Fish here, where essentially, they're questioning her about it. She says, he's dead. She confirms Oswald's dead to the two of them and confirms that it wasn't her that killed him. She didn't do it. Then there's a piece with Alan where he's kind of going, who did kill him? And she goes, well, that's not the big question. Who can make a cop commit cold-blooded murder?
But then she goes on to say and confirm everything, that Jim Gordon pulled the trigger, but who gave the order? Who got a cop to pull that trigger? And I love her kind of duplicity in all of this. Is like, I just want justice for little Oswald. Yeah. It's like, it's her pet. It was my little penguin. All these notions that almost she was like a mother to him. That she was teaching him the ways of being a great mob boss and a real underhand mob boss. And I'm sure Oswald has learnt so much from her. Absolutely. And like you kind of would say, you can see some of that in this episode with Oswald.
Yeah, absolutely.
But ultimately as well, there's a revenge and payback element to Falcone. And it also puts it in a slight, predicament ultimately, because she has said, on the one hand, it's a cop, it's Jim Gordon. We know that Renee Montoya and Crispus Allen already have suspicions over Jim Gordon, whether it's just by association with Harvey Bullock. She puts it on the shoulders of a cop, but puts the orders for that shooting on her boss's shoulders with Falcone. This puts her in a really precarious position, because Absolutely. A wrong word here or a wrong word there, and things may start to close in on it.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's odd that it's Laszlo that points it out to her. Laszlo, who got beaten up by Falcone's men the previous week for essentially an intrusion by Fish Mooney onto Falcone's territory. Laszlo got beaten up by them. He's the one that calls it out, where he goes, "You probably shouldn't be doing this. You've just turned the major crimes unit on Falcone now. There will be consequences to this."
And for his for that loyalty, she essentially turns to one of her bodyguards, one of her hired thugs, and says, "Sure, whilst you're at it, get rid of Laszlo." Yeah. Because at the same time, essentially kill her former lover. Because maybe he doesn't look as pretty as he used to, because he's just had a beating of his life from the Don Falcone's troops. But also, she is even more... You can see the simmer, I think, in Jada Pinkett Smith's portrayal of Fish Mooney. This idea, she really wants to get Falcone back, and she actually puts a hit out on, and a revenge hit on Carmine's lady.
Kind of bit on the side, probably.
Yeah, the bit on the side, that she's going to have an accident. And as a secondary part from that, she tells the guy, "Oh, and take Laszlo out as well. He's starting to bring the mood down." Yet he's just been incredibly loyal to her. Yeah. And that's a very interesting little sequence as well.
Yeah, and the bit we talked about last week with Laszlo possibly being the character Professor Pig that you like to bring up so often. Could this be the creation of the character that he's now a spurned lover, essentially? Could this lead into that creation of another bad guy in Gotham, which I think is interesting.
But this whole conversation between Montoya, Allen, and Mooney leads to Montoya and Allen tackling Jim Gordon directly, confronting him. The MCU are now kind of on to Jim Gordon, and they confront him in the precinct.
Yeah, it's a really, really good scene, actually. This is, I just think these scenes stand out as being something really separate in this episode, and really, really good. You could cut them all together into a nice little montage of this story of what actually is happening to Jim, and where the suspicion is coming in, and the interplay between these two characters is really good.
It's this pressure ratcheting up on Jim Gordon, because his colleagues, the colleagues who you would expect him to associate most closely to because of honesty, morality, the ethics that they may have of being relatively uncorrupt or not corrupt at all and clean, they think he is ultimately in the pocket of Falcone, that he is a killer, he is a corrupt and a bent cop who will carry out orders of the mobsters. And this pressure, you see this pressure ratcheting up on Jim Gordon, because they're confronting him about that he murdered Oswald quite explicitly.
Yeah.
On edge, Gordon? I'm fine. How can I help you?
We were just wondering, when you shot Cobblepot in the head and dumped his body in the river, did Falcone pay you? Or was that more of a favor to the Don type thing?
It's cops investigating cops. It's that internal affairs thing.
Yeah, that's exactly how Jim calls it out. It's when did the MCU become internal affairs, and they started saying when cops did things like this. It's really good, because when he gets as defensive as he does, and he gets his back starts to rise, you can tell he's just getting angry and aggressive with the two of them. And if he just explained it to them, maybe they could have worked something out. But he doesn't want the finger pointed at him. It really riles him up, and he completely says that he didn't kill it. He completely rejects the notion. In a sense, he is being truthful with Montoya and Allen. Yeah, but the response, the way he delivers it to them, he says, "I didn't do it," and they said, "What do you mean you didn't kill Cobblepot, or you didn't kill him for Falcone?"
Yeah.
that's the response from the two of them. They're totally of the same opinion. And once again, you get into the interview room with the two of them, they rip you to shreds. You know, they are pushing until Jim walks away.
But I love the final image of this scene where it pans back to a wide shot of the precinct area where they've had this conversation, and Jim has just kind of pushed his way past Crispus Allen. Crispus Allen is shouting after him as Jim is leaving, essentially, you know, feeling probably pretty scared, pretty annoyed that he's in this position and these people think this of him. And it's a great little frame of the scene. And I think it also just then links to something that you had spotted as well, a great scene between Jim Gordon and Harvey Bullock that relates to this whole thing where Jim Gordon suddenly throws caution to the wind with Harvey Bullock and has to trust him.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's what I'd mentioned essentially when we were watching it was that this is probably the first time that Harvey has had a full serious scene from end to end. And definitely in this episode, there's a lot of scenes where he maybe has a serious line, but it's followed by a gag or a joke. There's no gags or jokes in here. Harvey is dead serious. He mentioned in the pilot episode where he said, if we don't do what Falcone's is telling us to do, not only am I dead, which is most important to me, you're dead, and your girlfriend's dead. Everybody you know, we're all dead if you don't do what Falcone said. And he was genuinely terrified in that scene. In here, he is repeating it, and he looks even more scared. And Jim asks him, you know, if I don't do it, am I going to be the next person in the bay? Am I going to be the next person killed? Harvey doesn't answer him because the answer is yes, you will be.
Yeah, it's a really good scene. And then from this, the sort of fallout from this is again a much more personalised character discussion between Renee Montoya and Barbara Keene, where you get the backstory being fleshed out between these two characters, that they were lovers.
Yeah.
And this is a really good scene. You see that Renee Montoya is going to Barbara because she's concerned by what she perceives Jim to be and what she thinks he's done, and she is concerned for the safety of her ex-lover.
Yeah.
And she still has the key.
Yeah, absolutely. There's some creepiness in here. There's some, as I think I've mentioned in one of the previous episodes, there's some stuff with Renee Montoya where you're kind of going, step back, love. You're getting a bit too close there. You know, she not only does she go straight to Barbara to tell her that her potential, you know, her future husband is a murderer, to break them up essentially. She opens the door with the key that she kept when the two of them were together, which must be a couple of years now that they've been broken apart. Yeah, because you know Jim and Barbara have been together for a while, so it must be a couple of years since they were broken apart. She then accuses her of being a drug addict. Says she's getting high in the middle of the day, and she knows you've had a lot of drugs before, essentially.
Yeah, but there's a great comeback there where Renee Montoya goes, I was there through all of it, remember? And she's just essentially accused Barbara of starting the drug taking a bit too early in the morning. And Barbara just responds with a great line, you were a part of it.
Yeah.
That you kind of pushed me or made me begin to rely heavily or more heavily on drugs. And this is a really great insight between these two characters, the complexity of their relationship, the fact that maybe it wasn't all just lovey-dovey, that there was there was maybe a bit of antagonism between the two of them, but maybe they loved that and that's what kept them, you know, they fed off that, who knows, and it all got too much. We're just speculating here, but I mean, this is an excellent scene. And I just want to quickly make the point of, I think this is where I just think that this scene just seems at strange odds with the tone of the Balloonman. It feels like it's from a different episode compared to some of the other stuff in here. And I think that discordancy with the overall episode between some of these deeper, darker, and more serious, more challenging scenes for the audience, whether that marries as well to some of the lighter elements, I'm not entirely sure that works. But for me, this is a standout scene. It's great. Yeah,
I totally agree with you. I think the writer of this episode has written some episodes for Flash or for Arrow, and I think that's the tone for a lot of the episode. It's very similar in tone to some of the Flash or Arrow episodes where you've got a bad guy who dresses up in a costume and then, you know, commits murder. Essentially, you know, that's the basic concept of it. With these scenes, they seem like something you'd never see on the soap opera side that you'd see on Arrow and Flash. They're much more soap opera types from what we've seen of those shows.
I think as well,
and I think it stands out for that reason. But the stuff that you learn about their relationship in this, it's about a 2-minute scene. It's quite a long scene, I suppose, between just the two characters. But you've learned a significant amount about the two characters. You've learned that they had a very difficult past. You've learned that they were together for a long time. It was before Jim was around, and the kind of animosity between the two characters now, and how much they've gone apart.
They had a difficult relationship, but they obviously loved or cared incredibly deeply about one another. I mean, I love this notion that Montoya is kind of saying, he's lying to you, Barbara, and Barbara's kind of comes back with, yes, but you lied to me as well. And Renee Montoya kind of counters again. It's this quip of, yes, but you could tell, you could always tell. Ask yourself, do you know whether Jim is lying? Can you tell? Mm-hmm. And this just shows that, yes, their relationship seems to be difficult, but they knew one another intimately and so well. There's a lot of things being thrown out here that Barbara thinks, this is actually personal, that Rennie is doing this, coming here, essentially undermining the character of her fiancé-to-be, just to get at him because he is with her, and Renee Montoya still has feelings for Barbara, and she actually says, I can't stand seeing you with him.
Yeah.
It's a really excellent scene.
Yeah, absolutely. And she does make the plea with her. Once again, she says, I've been sober for a year, which Renee essentially feels that's the reason they broke up, was because she was doing a lot of drugs, or she was taking a lot of alcohol. She's now telling her, I'm sober. Oh, actually, maybe that won't matter, and then tries to kiss her, which doesn't go down well at all with Barbara. Barbara essentially wants this woman out of her home. She's moved on. It looks like Renee hasn't, and as I talked about before, the obsessive kind of nature of Renee is starting to come out a bit more, and I really like the development of this character.
Yeah. It
definitely reminds me, this relationship between the two of them, or the description of the past relationship, let me say, reminds me of her relationship with Daria towards the end of the comic book series Gotham Central that we covered.
Yes.
Where Darla had been her partner all the way throughout that. They had a great relationship, and as it started to get to the end, and as the pressure of their job came on board, Renee Montoya started to drink really heavily, go out late at night, lie to Darla every day, and their relationship started to break down within the series. And I think it's really telling. That's what they've taken from the character of Renee Montoya for this TV show, and I really, really enjoy it. I think they've done a great job.
And I think really what we see in some of the other scenes then is that it's planted a seed in Barbara's mind that she needs to probe and ask much more deeper questions of Jim about his job.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And that ultimately, I think, potentially is a source of tension.
Yeah, absolutely. And I suppose, once again, it's the shifting sands part of their relationship. It's the structure built on sand, I suppose, part of their relationship. He does love Barbara, and that's absolutely definite. She loves him. You can tell that for a fact. In the performance, you can tell that between all the interplay between them. But whenever she asks him about, his day-to-day job and some details about the investigations, you can tell he doesn't trust her with the information. She's already turned on him very quickly when he gave her a small piece of information in the last episode. So now he's not going to trust her with this huge piece of information that could see her turn against him completely.
Absolutely.
But it's a fantastic scene.
But whilst all this professional suspicion and turmoil and personal undermining is going on for Jim Gordon, he is also then investigating the Baloonman case. And what we find is that he gets, him and Harvey Bullock get a lead because of this guy called Smirkers, who his boss thinks is the Balloonman, because he sells weather balloons and 4 of them have gone missing, and this young employee has stopped coming into work. He's just vanished as far as his boss is concerned. And so they start tracking down this suspect, Smirkers.
Yeah, and with a great scene where they go to his apartment where they found him, and he's with his girlfriend essentially, who's about 7 foot tall by the looks of things. Almost a Grace Jones type of girl who beats the heck out of Harvey Bullock, and I just think it's a very funny scene.
It's a funny scene and really good. It's like the whole timing of it is really good. It's physical. And it's really funny. Where she's about to put a TV through his chuck it down onto his head, and Jim finally stops it, and you kind of just think that it's, Grant, she's probably going to get arrested as well for being violent and disorderly towards a police detective, and then Harvey Bullock, of course, being Harvey Bullock. It doesn't matter whether you're a man, woman, an animal, or whatever. You get a punch because you've just been punching him. This is like a fair fight to Harvey Bullock.
Yeah, absolutely. Fun little scene with him, and obviously the revelation that there's 4 weather balloons. So we had the original victim at the beginning of the show. We have a detective as the second victim, Lieutenant Bill Cranston, isn't it? He's essentially stopped by the Balloon Man this time. Dressed up as a hot dog seller, but looks really like the character The Shadow from DC Comics. He's got the mask pulled up over his face like a
bandana or a scarf, kind of just covering his nose and the lower half of his face.
Yeah, and he's wearing the fedora on his head. So
and he's got the trench coat as well.
Yeah, it looked really like The Shadow to me. The minute I saw it, I had to check it out on the internet and find out, is there any connection? Is this, are they revealing The Shadow as a character in here? What's really interesting is that essentially we find out later on in the show, you've obviously seen it, so we're not spoiling anything for you. But we find out later on in the show that the killer's name is actually Davis Lamont, and this officer is Detective Cranston. And the character of The Shadow, his actual name in the comic books is Lamont Cranston. So it absolutely has to be.
Yeah, it's a nod to The Shadow.
So while we don't have a Joker watch this week, we definitely have a DC character in here. There's definitely some reference in there.
But we're kind of introduced to Bill Cranston as being kind of an overly physical interrogator of suspects, to begin with. He likes to use his award that he got, which kind of looked like an Oscar, a grubby Oscar, to get a response from anyone he's interrogating, presumably by whacking suspects over the head when he's got them in the interview room.
Yeah, I like that he calls him O'Brien as well, which is a reference to the fact that a lot of cops in the city have an Irish origin, which I think is quite funny. A little bit about Sarah Essen actually comes in this episode, Captain Sarah Essen, which just kind of, I know it's a little bit out of place from where it happened in the episode, but I just love her reaction when they find out that there's 4 weather balloons, so therefore there's going to be at least 4 victims of the Balloon Man. And she just goes, oh God, this is the worst thing that could possibly happen. The victims have all been people in power in the city who are corrupt, which is basically everybody in power in the city. And it's her responsibility to resolve the case. So once again, this is her job on the line. Just like in the last episode, this is her job on the line if they don't solve it. So it's get out there, fix this as soon as possible. Really good scene with Sarah Essen. We haven't really seen much of her so far in the show, but I really do like her position as the captain here.
Yeah, and in this sense, then victim number 2, Lieutenant Cranston, is picked because he is seen as being an amoral thug of a cop who uses force where it's not necessary. And the interesting thing about this second victim is ultimately that Cranston can handle himself in a fight. So it looks like the Balloon Man is getting taken out here because his plan doesn't go as he thinks it should, and he's knocked to the ground. And Cranston starts rooting through his pockets and picks out a note, a piece of paper, and there's something familiar about the document and what's written on it, and he recognizes something. And as he does, he gets cuffed by the ankle and then gets floated slowly up to the stratosphere.
And once again, I think this was better. The first scene of the killer taking him out, I think was a little bit better, but
I like the image.
I felt because it was going so slow, and because of how close he was to the building beside him, he could have just reached out like half an inch and could have grabbed onto the wall beside him to pull himself down. It just felt, again,
I thought the way he got taken up, you didn't get a long shot where it was slightly unproportioned to the buildings around. Yep. It was him being dragged up towards the heavens, screaming. I thought that was a nice shot as it pans back and he floats up.
Mm-hmm.
But each to their own, I suppose. But we now have Cranston, this cop, and then we also get the third victim, but we don't get to see the third victim taken off into the heavens is a priest.
Yeah.
Again, is this idea that he's a paedophile, I think, or he's been involved with abusing children under his care to some degree or to some extent. And
yeah, I think essentially Harvey calls him the diddler priest is what he's known as in the city. So yeah.
Yeah, and so we now have, we've got a corrupt financier, a corrupt cop, and now a corrupt priest within the church. All these three are making an appearance as deserving of this kind of vigilante treatment within the episode. Yeah,
and you get the reactions of the public, of the actual normal Gothamites. You hear them on the TV. Once again, the TV is brought back in. You hear them on the news, essentially singing the praises of this vigilante that's taking care of all the criminals that the public see. They don't care about the drug dealers. They don't care about the people robbing wallets. What they care about is the people in power who are even more corrupt. And that's what's coming across. It was pointed out that this scene is actually very similar to one that's in The Dark Knight Returns, the Frank Miller comic book and the movie. That essentially this is the citizens of Gotham taking up on the side of the vigilantes versus the cops and versus the people in power.
Yeah. So a real close connection to that coming from these con men being taken off into space.
Yeah, and the nice little gag of the woman going, "Can you go after my landlord next?"
Yeah,
starts
exactly.
giving his name and address.
That's a good little gag. Like Harvey Bullock as well goes, if it's a con man, go ahead, float them off up into the atmosphere. But when they kill a cop or they take down Cranston, that's a job safety issue. Now all of a sudden, all the resource of the force is brought to heed on whoever this balloon man is and find him as quickly as possible because they took a cop.
Yeah. Essentially, they do track Davis Lamont down as the killer. They find the piece of paper that the cop had taken. They find that it's actually the signature of Jim Gordon that he's given when Selena Kyle was handed over to him. So he knows exactly who this guy is. He works for Child Services. They track him down. They meet up with him. And this actually is probably one of the best written scenes of the Balloon Man side of things. The justification for why this guy became the vigilante is really good, and I really, really liked it. And it's kind of unfortunate for me that it came on the back of some, to me, quite poor visualizations of the guy. Perhaps they could have had him poisoning people. Perhaps they could have had him doing something different than sending people off with weather balloons. But his justification for becoming this vigilante and why he snapped, he's described as being just a good guy. He works with kids. He's done it for years. And essentially the reason why he's done it is because the mayor decided to round up all the kids and send them off to this horrible place upstate. And this guy has realized that all the work he's done for the last 15 years with kids is for nothing. He's not able to change Gotham. He's not been able to do anything in Gotham because of the corrupt politicians that are there, that use every opportunity to turn on the children of the city that he's spent his life dedicated to them. That's why he went after all the other corrupt people in the city. It was because of this turn by the mayor.
Yeah, absolutely. And we then have this really important realization by the young Bruce Wayne about vigilantism.
And who stood up to the corruption eating at the heart of Gotham, willing to break the law in order to save it.
Well, I imagine the criminals of Gotham are sleeping well tonight.
He killed people. That made him a criminal too.
That's very true.
So he makes the distinction. Yes, he was a vigilante, but he killed people when he did it. That means he's bad. This means he is no better than the criminals. Yeah. And it's this realization that maybe someone who brought them to justice and didn't kill them would be better.
Yeah.
That rather than simply going back on a revenge killing is the distinction that the young Bruce Wayne here seems to make. And now with this man gone, who will defend Gotham now?
Yeah, it's a really interesting point of revelation, I suppose, as you say, for Bruce Wayne. There's a couple of little things that happen for Bruce in this episode. There's the piece about he's investigating his parents' murders. He's taken the police files from the police, and Alfred's really shocked by this. He's like,
where did he get them from?
Yeah. And he's like, it wasn't that hard. You're kind of going, okay, did you break into the police station as a 10-year-old boy and steal this stuff? Yeah, no, it's an interesting one because these are two number one, we've seen many interpretations of the character that essentially his first investigation was into his parents' murder. That's what he said a number of times. So this is playing out now. And secondly, this piece, which is fundamental to Batman's character, that he doesn't kill. He's a vigilante, but he doesn't kill his victims. Both coming out in this episode.
Exactly. And with those police files as well, he makes that lovely little notion come alive that I'm looking for clues, then I'll be a detective.
Yeah.
It's this idea that he sees that he has to be clever about finding and tracking these people down, that he's becoming a detective, and that it links into then maybe these notions of justice. The young Bruce Wayne's development and the path that he goes down, he's
Absolutely.
now decided two important things that we know about the Batman: that you have to look for clues and be a detective, and secondly, that it's about arresting and apprehending the criminal, not about killing them.
Yeah, absolutely. No, really, really, really good scenes. So one other piece of revelation within this, really for Jim, comes from the Baloonman. He talks to the guy as he's being carted off in the ambulance, asks him who his final victim is and who it was supposed to be, and talks to Barbara about this because it actually has genuinely disturbed Jim Gordon. Because what the Baloonman says to him was, it doesn't matter. There's so many corrupt people. You could never have saved the victims unless you caught me, essentially. There's so many corrupt people in Gotham. I could just attach a balloon randomly to any of the major politicians. Everybody was a target for him, which I thought was quite interesting. I thought that was a good little piece.
Yeah, and it's this notion that Jim Gordon calls the city of Gotham sick. That it's sick, it's ill, and people just don't really seem to care. But that's why they've attached and embraced the Baloonman, because they're doing stuff that is almost a witch hunt in a sense.
Yeah.
And he feels that he's let the people of Gotham down by allowing this person to actually get some kind of credence and credibility of the people of Gotham. And, there's a really then great scene, tender scene between him and Barbara, where she's kind of like, she realizes he's in a tough position and she sort of expresses her feelings towards him. And that's a really personal moment between the two of them, which
Absolutely.
is really nice.
And coming on the back of the scenes with Montoya, she's has this background knowledge now about Jim, and she has some concerns now about him, but essentially she's reiterating that she's on his side and she's going to stand up for him, essentially. Yeah, really, really good. So the other major character arc that's in this episode, which kind of isn't really connected to anything else, is what's happening with Oswald. We saw him at the start of the episode arrive back in the city. There's a bunch of really good scenes with Robin Lord Taylor's Oswald Cobblepot. Once again, a real standout in the show, I think, in this episode. Yeah.
Definitely. We see him sort of arrive back in Gotham, as we said at the start. But we also see him get recognised, and he is petrified by this. And again, you see his sort of survival, brutal instincts kind of come flowing out as, the guy gets his Achilles heel sliced and then repeatedly stabbed.
Yeah.
He, luckily for Jim Gordon as well, doesn't want to be noticed just as much as Jim Gordon never wants him ever to come back to Gotham.
Yeah, but there's some really important lines between Oswald and this guy that catches him, who's one of Fish Mooney's thugs, really. He essentially says to him, I had to come back to Gotham. It's my home. It's the only place I've ever known. I am the future of Gotham. And the guy said, well, if you're the future of Gotham, then Gotham's got a lot to worry about.
Yeah, it's in big trouble, basically.
It's in big trouble. And he says it, I know. Which is the thing. Oswald knows Gotham is in trouble, and he wants to be the one to save it. Whatever that means to Oswald is open to interpretation.
Exactly.
I thought it was quite interesting.
But this episode sees Oswald, in a sense, squirming his way back into the mobster society of Gotham. But obviously, Fish Mooney's empire and Falcone's empire are far too dangerous for him. He can't go back there. He is technically dead for them. And so he begins to start at the bottom again in the Maroney's family's empire, and primarily in the employ of Maroney in his restaurant, in the kitchens.
Yeah, I think this is really interesting. He's essentially capitalizing on the plan that he'd made when he was sitting in his caravan, staring up at the his map of Gotham and his map of all the connections between these people. He obviously saw, as we said, Maroni didn't appear on that map, so he's obviously seen a way back in, and it's through Maroni and through his restaurant. But yeah, the violence and the attitude of Oswald of essentially he'll do anything to get himself in here. He's told he doesn't have the right shoes, so he stabs and kills someone who has the right shoes and takes the shoes and gets a job. It's quite a brutal
rather
scene.
than go out and buy them
Exactly,
like any normal, sane, unpsychotic person would do.
Yeah,
exactly.
yeah. Another little point that's in there after he kills one of the guys, he goes off and gets himself a tuna sandwich. So once again, after killing someone, he goes and gets himself something to eat. This is possibly where he starts putting on the weight to become the Penguin over the years. We've seen it a couple of times in the past, but that's quite an interesting little bit.
Tuna sandwich is generally quite healthy.
But the sandwich isn't healthy, the white bread.
Yeah, the mayonnaise.
Put on a lot of weight.
Yeah. But we also, as well, then, we get introduced to the first time to Sal Maroni.
Yeah.
With David Zayas.
Mm-hmm. David Zayas of Dexter, playing the role of Sal Maroni. I think he does a great job here.
He is creepy. Yeah. I really, really enjoyed. Like, he's not on the screen for very long. It's really short moment, but he conveys a creepy, dark menace more so than Falcone. John Doman there. It's kind of this honourable, sort of powerful.
Old money.
Mobster, yeah, old money. This is someone who is more scrappy, who is fighting to undermine and is maybe a bit more subversive in how he goes about things than Falcone. Falcone is about, we keep a structure. Maroni is, let's upset that structure and be a bit underhand about how we get into a position of power. He wants ultimately what Falcone has, but he has to go about it in a different way because Falcone pulls all the strings.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is, traditional setup from a mobster film. There's obviously two rival families here. One's in power, one isn't. The one that isn't in power essentially is saying, I've worked my way up, which means probably killed his way up the ladder and isn't going to stop soon. He makes the mention of his plan, some kind of plan for Arkham that'll show Gotham that Falcone isn't in control, that he has more of the strings than Falcone does. Oswald overhears it because he's sitting there with his ear wide open for anything he can possibly pick up. And there's a great little standoff moment between the two of them, or a great little introduction between Sal Maroni and Oswald, which I think is really interesting, where he introduces himself as Paolo to have an Italian background,
And Maroni kind of makes this point. Sal Maroni makes the point of Gotham is a city of opportunity. I was like you. He actually looks at Oswald Cobblepot or Paolo as he's being introduced to him. And says, I was like you. I kept my head down and worked hard. And look where I've come now. He's like, kind of looks at him very menacingly and hands out some money. And Oswald is, sassy enough to realise, I didn't hear anything. Mm-hmm. But we get introduced to Arkham and this link to the Arkham area of Gotham. And that is going to play out in future episodes. That's kind of been indicated previously.
Yeah. Yep.
And you see the kind of resentment that Maroni has of Falcone, that Falcone is only the boss of Gotham because people think that he is. Arkham will expose him and show that the Emperor has no clothes.
Yeah.
That he is weak and that other people can be equally as important and take over that mantle. Like, this is a real power play. There's so many different competing power plays. You've got Fish seeking her revenge, like we talked about, against Carmine. She really wants to see him dead. Ultimately, it's much more brutal. Maroni is about getting his power and influence within the city and squashing Falcone as well. And at the same time, then you've got Oswald. They either think he's dead or they think he's called Paolo. Yeah. They don't even know that this is a threat to him, but he is waiting, watching, and has learnt from what he did from episode 1 and where that got him.
Yeah, absolutely. And I do love this scene. I think it's a really, really good scene between Maroni and the introduction of Maroni, really. It could appear in any episode. There's no real connection with the Balloonman except when he sees the news story about the priest essentially being killed on the TV and has this kind of really good quote that I like.
Once again, Cardinal Quinn, accused of multiple counts of sexual abuse, is the latest victim of the vigilante.
See, this is not good. Can't go around killing priests. At least not in public. Go take care of your mother, Paula.
Where it just shows the violence, of Maroney, where he's essentially saying, you can kill priests, but just not in public, which I think is really good. But then we see, another scene I wanted to talk about was a scene between Fish and Falcone later on.
Yeah, and there's all these competing rivalries, all are merging together around Arkham, and it's this idea as well that, we find out that Fish's plan to give Carmine Falcone's bid on the side a little accident has worked. Mm-hmm. She's called Natalia, and she has been given a little accident.
Yeah.
And it moves on to Arkham then. Again, we get these notions that, people are behaving crazy, and crazy is bad for business, as Falcone says. Ever since the Wayne's murder, the city has gone crazy. It's this rumbling, and Arkham is probably, in a nice sort of way, is going to expose this crazy element of the city.
Yeah.
It's the home of the asylum, and the city is kind of unsettled after the Wayne's murder. But it moves on to, are there any rumblings from Maroney's camp?
Yeah, but I think it's hugely important. What they're talking about is essentially, Falcone is essentially saying is the old ways are starting to change, where you could be in control, where you had, as he said in the first episode, where you can't rule the city like this without order. That order is starting to break down, and he's noticing it. He notices it purely from Maroney, because he's a very different style of criminal than he is. He's attacking, he's killing. He potentially is the one that took out his girlfriend, is what he thinks. Or does he suspect Fish Mooney of doing that? I'm not too sure. There is definitely a little bit of a suspicion on his part. But what he's seeing is that people are starting, to live by different rules now already. And where's he going to fit in now that the pillars of the community, where the Waynes are gone, and he's the other pillar, and he's being attacked on all sides. And yeah. I really like this idea.
But he still recognizes Maroney as part of the same thing. I love this notion that he said that Penguin was an odd little fellow, like just before he ordered Jim Gordon to shoot him, or so he thinks. Mm-hmm. And for him, it's this idea that he would never consider Oswald Cobblepot to be a rival, or any serious contender. He may have his suspicions about Fish Mooney. He doesn't even consider Oswald as any form of rival. This is all about underestimating what is happening, maybe being blind to what is actually happening, and underestimating, people who you would consider just to be pure down and outs and have no business running crime syndicates or whatever. And this is because Oswald has nothing to lose.
Exactly. So, yeah, really, really good this time. Another fantastic bit from Robin Lord Taylor in this episode. Really enjoyed it. There was one little bit in there, wasn't there, behind Falcone? The dancers behind him. Kind of thinking, was that Harley Quinn? It's amazing what a bit of blonde hair and two
heavy eyeliner
and two ponytails. It does.
Yeah, I mean, we're not going to be having a Joker watch this episode. We really couldn't see anything that might be the Joker.
Absolutely, but if you saw anything, send us in some feedback and let us know where we got it wrong. And once again, the episode ends with a nice little cliffhanger with Oswald turning up at the door of Jim Gordon's house.
Yeah, and Barbara's apartment.
Yeah. That's true. There's actually Barbara's apartment. You're totally right.
She owns the property in that relationship.
She's got the money.
But it's a great little ending. We've seen Oswald sort of creeping his way back into Gotham mobster society, as you do, if you move and turn in those circles. Yeah. And he's just there with his feet out, splayed out there, stood up, bolt upright. He has a fantastic little line. "Hello, James, old friend." His delivery is amazing, and end of show. Yeah. It's a brilliant little ending to this episode, actually, and it's a great little cliffhanger for what's to come in the next episode.
really excited to see the next episode. Is there anything else from the episode that you want to talk about, John?
I don't think so. I think for me, I think that's really all from the episode. I mean, the only other thing I kind of liked, which I thought was quite funny, was when Carl Smirkers, the guy who stole the balloons for the Balloonman, like he starts to say, do you know how weather balloons work? You know, ultimately they will deflate because of the pressure changes, and all these victims will start falling down to Earth. And it just reminded me of A Fish Called Wanda with the old lady and her 4 dogs, trying to be killed by Michael Palin's character with the piano, and he just keeps taking off his dogs. But in this case, I think it's Lieutenant Cranston comes crashing down to Earth right on top of her, and she gets wiped out. So old ladies really do have to be worried about what's above them. I thought it was a really... I enjoyed the comedy element of that, I have to say. I know maybe yourself less so.
It felt a little bit too Looney Tunes for me. Yeah.
But I think, for me, this is kind of the slight issue with this episode. For me, it's my, I say, least favourite of the 3 episodes so far. And in that sense, that's the case. But I think there's some really important elements that make up and continue the stories from the first and second episodes, whether it's Oswald coming back to Gotham, whether it's the continuing rivalries between Fish and Falcone, and introducing the Roni as a further element to that. It develops this the MCU characters of Renee Montoya and Crispus Allen and their suspicion of Jim. You find out more about Montoya and Barbara's previous relationship and how that might start to get tricky for Barbara's relationship with Jim. And so they are some really important themes that are continuing through from the other episodes. And they're great, and I love them. I think they're really well done. And that's part of the issue, is that they just seem slightly at odds with then these lighter elements for me. But having said that, some of those lighter elements I also kind of enjoyed, sat back and had a little chuckle, like the lady getting squashed from Lieutenant Cranston falling from the sky, the fight of Harvey Bullock with the prostitute when they arrest Smirkers. All those elements I kind of liked, but there was a slight discordancy between the general lightness of the Balloonman and how he killed his victims with some of these more serious elements, even though his whole speech at the end was really well done.
Yeah, and for me, I don't want to repeat anything that you said. I think overall, I'd love if those elements that I liked of the episodes had been cut out and put around a better villain. I kind of feel you could have done something like the first Vigilante in Gotham, which is huge. I think you could have done that over the course of 5 or 6 episodes. You could have done a murder in this episode that Gordon and Jim couldn't solve, a murder in the next episode, or an episode 3 or 4 down the line that they couldn't solve, and stretch this over the course of 4 or 5 episodes. I got 22 to fill up here, They don't have to squash it all into 40 minutes to get an investigation in here. I felt it was just a bit mishandled there. Obviously, I think I'm pretty clear in my feelings of the episode. But overall, personally, there's so many elements that came out of this episode that I really did like. That it's definitely not an episode I would tell anybody to skip, because there's a lot of things I'd say will probably play out in the future.
Yeah, I mean, and I kind of agree. I think that they don't necessarily need to have a case that is solved at the end of each episode. And maybe they don't even need to have a case. They could quite easily have introduced the Balloonman as someone who was tying them to one of the blimps, one of the Zeppelins, that the police didn't even know about until at some point one of them falls back down to the ground, dead. And all of a sudden, where's this? And they go up, investigate, and find a whole host of them up there in another episode somewhere down the line. And that actually episode 3 may have been better looking at some of the story elements that are being carried over from 1 and 2. I just think the pressure of having a case that is started, investigated, and completed and tied up at the end of each episode maybe there's a lot of pressure being put on them to do that, and maybe they can spread that out. I would agree with you that to see the Balloonman sort of spread over the first part of the season gives time for that concept of the vigilante to develop within the show.
Yeah. Yep, no, that's our thoughts on the Baloonman. Send your feedback in on what you thought about it when you get the chance. You can send it into feedback at GothamTVPodcast.com. You can give it to us on Twitter, through Facebook, Gotham TV Podcast in both places. And yeah, let's get on to the feedback for this episode.
Hello, James. Old friend.
So our first piece of feedback is from Daniel from Welcome to Level 7. Again, thanks again for contacting us, Daniel. So he says, hello, detectives. I have 2 brief thoughts on episode 2. So a bit about the last episode.
Selena Kyle,
isn't it? Yeah. So his first point is the bad of the episode. He kind of really dislikes the MCUing of Sarah Essen. So on their show, they talk about the Marvel Cinematic Universe and, essentially how they create their characters to move from comic book page to screen. Sarah Essen, we talked about her on our Batman Year 1 coverage. The character herself is a love interest of Jim Gordon's. And what he says here is that he feels they've really missed the opportunity to create a CW-style love triangle between 2 women that have been in Jim Gordon's comic book wife. But I cannot believe with her moral compass and the position of authority, relationship with Jim would ever be interested in Essen. Maybe that kind of explains the need for the character of Dr. Tompkins, who we spoke about earlier on. What do you think, John? The feeling of Sarah Essen, what's her...
Yeah, I can't see that Captain Essen and Jim could get it on in that sense. She's but she's kind of, she called him the department's firebrand.
Yeah.
And at the moment, I think she's very much located on this political necessity. Her view on it is to watch out for the interests of her political superiors, in particular the mayor, but probably right up to the commissioner, who we don't know who that is at the moment.
Mm-hmm.
And that seems to have put her at odds with Jim, who has a much more sort of straightforward approach to this. It doesn't want politics to be involved, and he wants to close cases after investigating them and getting the right person.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think there's a need for a character like Sarah Essen in the show. I think all they've really taken from the comic books is the name, personally. I think there's a need for a character who's the head of the GCPD, which has full of corrupt cops, essentially. How does this work? How does it function? It can only function under a person like this who just wants to get things done and not be in the spotlight and not be, highlighted as being the cause of it. She wants to be the one that's highlighted for solving cases, essentially. So,
yeah, and then I think in terms of the love triangle aspect between 2 women, I think that's there. It's just with Renee Montoya and Barbara Keane.
Yeah.
And that element of a jealous ex, potentially, or overly protective ex in Renee Montoya to Barbara.
Yeah.
I can understand her motives as to why she would want to do that.
Mm-hmm.
If she thinks that Jim is ultimately a murderer and a corrupt cop that can't be trusted. But I think at the moment, the maybe untraditional love triangle here is not between 2 women with their battle over a man, but potentially it's Jim, Barbara, and then Renee Montoya, who is looking in some ways to undermine Jim and Barbara's relationship.
Yeah.
And maybe, though, having said that, I think you could have the use of Dr. Leslie Tompkins can come in and then be this further element that you would have a love quad.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we're in a pretty lucky position in the fact that we've read Gotham Central coming into this TV show, so we were very aware of Renee Montoya as a character and very aware that she had this past. I think it came as quite a surprise in episode 3 to a lot of people who viewed it. It came as quite a surprise that there was actually a relationship, not just a friendship, in the past between Barbara Keane and Renee Montoya. So we're kind of lucky in that sense. But Daniel goes on to say the good, and he says, wow, nobody's really talking about it, but Richard Kind is bringing it. Richard Kind plays the mayor in the show. He says he honestly felt he was the best actor in episode 2. He expected with the sitcom background, he played the character of the mayor's helper in Spin City with Michael J. Fox, a comedy show that ran for a number of years. He felt with this background that he was going to portray the mayor as somewhat silly. Instead, I feel kind of creeped out by him. thought I needed a shower and was totally convinced the power-loving political professional. It's a fantastic performance. So, I kind of agree with him. I was a bit dubious about Richard Kind as well, for the same reason. The only thing I've really ever seen him in is comedy roles in the past. I think he's doing a great job. I think we talked about the scene between himself and Jim last week, where Jim Gordon calls him out on using this the issue that's gone on in the episode with the child catchers to displace all the kids of Gotham who are on the street, displace them and send them off north. He's using this as his to further his political career, essentially. And the response from Richard Kind's character is, as I said, thanks for your feedback, like any good politician would.
Yeah, I mean that was really good, and I think Daniel here has really pulled out something that is right. It's really good. Certainly, he did a really good job in episode 2. Selena Kyle, definitely.
Yeah, thanks for your feedback, Daniel, again, and I'm looking forward to hearing your feedback on episode 3.
Absolutely. But some feedback from episode 3 has come in from our friend Scott Fisher. And he's basically got, I have a prediction about this episode. I think over time, this episode is going to prove to be one of the pivotal episodes of the whole season. At every turn, Gotham was hitting Jim with how corrupt and out of control it is. People are accusing him of being corrupt, going to Barbara about him being corrupt. Oswald coming back to town and Fish trying to improve her standing in the mob. The whole episode was fantastic. Plus, the vigilante showed up and Bruce took an interest in it, and Jim openly talked about how there would be more and how people had lost faith. It was a smart and well-written episode, which really has me looking forward to what's going to come. That is really interesting because, in part, I actually do agree with Scott. I think there's huge elements here that are going to really inform later episodes within this season. And in fact, as we said about the young Bruce Wayne, and as Scott has pointed out himself, the influences the young Bruce Wayne and what Batman ultimately becomes, which is a detective and a vigilante as seen by the cops, but one that doesn't kill. He's after pursuing the criminals and bringing them to justice, not a revenge killing. And so that is really important. And I think there are elements within this, exactly as Scott has said, that are going to be really important for what's to come in the season. Even just the introduction of Maroni, the introduction of what's to come, and why for the Arkham area of Gotham. These are really going to be important. And I think the vigilante. The only place I would kind of maybe just pull back from that from Scott was just that the context of the Balloonman and some elements of it seemed not to work with those really important elements. They seem slightly discordant from one another, but otherwise I think I would agree. I think there's a lot in this that will be important for the season.
Yeah, absolutely. You've heard my thoughts on the episode at large. I do agree with what Scott's saying. The pieces that will form parts of the next couple of episodes and the rest of the season, I think, are really fantastic. I loved a lot of those scenes. I think they were really, really enjoyable. I just feel if you have your vigilante show up first, it would have been nice if you just have one vigilante that spreads over a couple of episodes. That might have fixed the episode, this particular episode, for me. But definitely thanks for your feedback, Scott, and obviously I really, really look forward to hearing more from you.
And then just quickly, we got a lovely review from Pastor of the Batman on iTunes, which we really want to thank them for. It's really helpful to get feedback and reviews on iTunes because it opens up our episodes to other people who may be interested in listening to a podcast about the show Gotham. And secondly, it just helps us to know that we're doing stuff that people are finding interesting and useful. So again, thank you to the Pastor of the Batman.
Love that handle.
It's a great handle, isn't it, for the review.
Yeah. And as always, if you want to send your feedback into us, I did mention it earlier, but no problem repeating it again. You can email us at feedback@gothamtvpodcast.com.
You can also search for us with the handle Gotham TV Podcast to leave comments and feedback through Facebook, Twitter, and Google+. We also have social media handles at Instagram and Flickr as well. So you're more than welcome to go through those.
Thanks very much. And again, as always, for your feedback. Next week's episode is called Arkham. So I presume we're going to start finding out some more about Arkham Asylum. I'm really excited about that. It's directed by TJ Scott, who has directed a ton of episodes of TV shows. Really looking forward to seeing what he brings to the table. And it's written by another one of the executive producers, Ken Woodcuff, is the guy's name. So kind of looking forward to seeing that. He's written some episodes of The Mentalist in the past, which was Bruno Heller's show, wasn't it?
Yep.
So another one of the team writing his version of the story here. So looking forward to seeing it.
So thank you so much for listening. Again, it's been great to go through this episode of Gotham.
Mm-hmm.
Can't wait for the next one, but thanks so much for listening.
Absolutely.
Gotham TV Podcast. Do not cross Alan and Montoya.
Might have to move back to the UK, John.
Have to take a shit back and forth.
Yeah.
A shit, not a shit.
Right.
That's a job safety issue.
Just
You know,
job
like
safety.
now all of a sudden, all the forces and all the money and resources. Now all the resource of the force, is brought to the young Bruce Wayne, and as Scott has pointed out himself, the influences what Batman ultimately influences what Bruce influences the young Bruce Wayne and what Batman ultimately becomes, which is a detective.